Hi all, this is Jan Almighty and welcome to this video. So today I bring you a Fischer game. Once again, it's been a while, so 1959 Zurich tournament, we aren't finished with it. Fischer did play a lot of good games, he played against a lot of strong players, and he also had some memorable games. So it's only natural from me to actually show you more games from this tournament. Here today I'm going to show you a game between Fischer and Mr. Erwin Nievergelt. And most of you probably haven't heard about Mr. Nievergelt. Maybe there was this one instance where people say that Mr. Nievergelt did become famous, and that was his game against Mikhail, and it was also in this tournament. So in 1959 Zurich tournament, where Tal did sacrifice, Tal's style and everything. So maybe if you're up for it, I could also show that game. But I think I definitely will, because it is a nice game. But let's see how Fischer did play against Mr. Nievergelt in this tournament. He starts, of course, with the e4, and we see once again c5. And we all know what that means. After knight to f3, knight to c6, d4, pawn captures on d4, knight captures on d4, knight to f6, knight to c3, d6, bishop to c4. We are in the Fischer or Sozin attack variation. e6, bishop to b3. We have already seen many games from Fischer. If you haven't, definitely do check out my playlist of Fischer's games, where he tends to play this idea of bishop to c4 to bishop to b3. Bishop to e7, both players castle, and we have bishop to e3 now. Bishop to d7 and f4. So first playing f4, and probably later on preparing king to h1 to move from this dangerous diagonal. Now knight to d4, bishop to d4, and giving up the knight so that you can play bishop to c6, now twice attacking the pawn. Queen to e2 and b5. And this is the first moment where I would like to stop, because of course this is one of the variations in this line, but it is I would say a little bit strange one. The main idea behind it is if knight captures on b5, which happened in the game, you want to capture the pawn on e4. So knight captures, you go bishop captures on b5, queen captures on b5, and knight captures on e4. And here what happened, white has been left with the bishop pair, but he has given up a very strong pawn in the center. And here how you would continue, you would play f5 to challenge black's center immediately and use the bishop pair with white pieces. So this was a possibility, but actually here after knight to b5, Fischer, one other thing, if you don't want to capture, of course, there is always a possibility for a3, but I encourage you to capture here because it is mainly a good variation for white. Here, Mr. Nievergelt actually went for e5, and after pawn captures on e5, pawn captures on e5, Fischer played bishop to e3. If bishop captures on e5, then we come to this queen to b6, and this is why I mentioned king to h1 previously. Knight goes to d4, otherwise you just lose the knight, and now knight to d7, attacking this bishop. Here we have queen to h5 defending, and after knight captures, queen captures, bishop to f6. You're pretty much forced to capture, pawn captures and queen captures, and after this bishop captures on e4, as you can see, is a pretty forced line. A lot of exchanges. In the end, black has the exchange, but white does have these two pawns, very strong pawns. One of them is a passed pawn, and it is now up to you. Do you really want to play this game? But Fischer decides not to. He does want to capture one more pawn. He decides to play bishop to e3 here to keep up from this queen to b6 ideas. Now a6 was played, and a6, once again, if you capture on e4, probably Nievergelt was afraid of something like knight to a7. So giving up one other pawn, and then you have three passed pawns on the queen side, isn't looking all that good for black. So here a6 was played, knight to c3, and only now capturing on e4. But this allowed a nice little tactic for Fischer. So this is why I wouldn't encourage you to go into these variations with black. If you go, please capture on b5 immediately. Here Fischer played a rook to f7. And after this you have to capture, otherwise you have just lost the pawn. Rook captures and bishop captures on f7. If king captures on f7, then queen to c4. You cannot defend, you have to play king to f8, rook to f1, knight to f6, and queen to c6. White has been left with a pawn. once again a passed pawn in a very active position. So this is a very good situation for white. But other than that, not much good would happen the other way. So here king to h8 is played to just go, maybe not to go for all of these exchanges. Queen to c4 still, but actually much better for Fischer here was to just simplify. Knight captures, bishop captures, and simply bishop to c4, and you're very good. You have a healthy pawn, you have a passed pawn, and you just continue with the game. But here we saw after knight queen to c4, and now bishop to g5. Nievergelt find the correct move, because here after knight captures on e4 there is this bishop to e3, king to h1, and now black is left with a bishop pair. So it is a better situation for black, but okay, Fischer is still a pawn up. Queen to d7 and bishop to h5, moving the bishop, bishop to b5 attacking the queen, and queen to b3. Now queen to d4 attacking the knight, and now since it is not all that good for white, so all of his pieces are getting attacked all the time, Fischer needs to find a way how to approach this position, and he finds the best move how to simplify, knight to d6, seemingly giving up the knight, but then queen captures on e3. You get rid of the black's bishop pair, you have the same colored bishops, and you enter the endgame where you're a pawn up. But if you don't capture, of course, there is this knight to f7 check threat, followed by maybe some smarter checkmate ideas, or you will lose the other bishop on b5. So queen to d6 and queen to e3 was played. And now, yeah, it's just a pawn up, and we all know that this should be pretty much enough for Fischer. Bishop to c6, occupying this strong diagonal, but of course bishop to f3, stopping that. e4, and now of course you cannot capture on e4, it isn't a free pawn, because queen to e7, pinning the bishop. And you can go into this variation where you have a bishop and a rook against the queen with two pawns, but why complicate your life if you can just simply move the bishop and continue with that pawn. Rook to d8, and now simple h3, making room for the king, h6, black follows the same idea, and now rook to d1. Going for the rook exchange, queen to f6, rook captures, queen captures, and now even bishop captures on a6. Now that's the second pawn. Now you have three passed pawns on the queen side. One would say pretty much enough for win the game, but Mr. Nievergelt continues. He doesn't even go for queen to d1, king to h2, queen to c2 to bring back at least one other pawn. He goes for queen to d5, which just means that he wants to wait for the queen to move and then maybe push e3 and make some threats. First a3, moving the pawn out of the attack, and now h5. b4, so what you should do in the endgame like this, push the passed pawns, and now queen to d1. King to h2, still not capturing the pawn, but playing h4. Maybe going for some queen to a1, queen to g3, and possibilities of a perpetual if Fischer ever moves the queen, so and allows it. But here, okay, first we have queen to f4. Fischer always now has this idea of queen f8, king h7, queen f5, king back, queen c8, picking up the bishop. But this could run into some perpetuals, so probably he won't play it. Queen to e1, so going for this idea of perpetuals, but now b5, attacking the bishop, bishop to d5, and b6. e3, final chance, let's say final try for Mr. Nievergelt, maybe going for that g2 pawn. If the queen moves, queen g3, queen g2 is checkmate, but Fischer simply plays b7, bishop captures on b7, and now a forced win, which is queen to f8 check, king to h7, and now not capturing because of course those ideas here, definitely not playing this, but bishop to d3. If you go forward, then you have this queen to d6 check, and checkmate. There is a forced checkmate in 2, so queen to f5 is checkmate, and because of this you shouldn't play this, but rather g6. But now queen to f7, if you go to h6, queen to g6 is checkmate, so you have to go to h8, and now queen to g6. It was actually in this position that Mr. Nievergelt resigned the game, and the reason is that the threats of checkmate are defended, and white is threatening checkmate in 1. So what you need to do is actually queen to g3, so force the exchange of queens. Queen captures, pawn captures, king captures, you're in the end game where you have 3 pawns, and that is, I guess, pretty much enough for everybody to win this. So yeah, this is pretty much it for this game. Not a lot of sets, so Fischer played pretty much normal. Mr. Nievergelt went for this strange variation in the Sozin attack or the Fischer attack and just lost in the end. As I've said at the beginning of the video, Mr. Nievergelt is famous for that one game from this tournament against Stahl, so I will probably cover that game as well. That being said, I would like to thank you for watching this video, and I will see you next time.